So hello everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on creating physical experiences in the digital world. My name is Natasha Holloway and I'm the head of Hotwire Strategy and Marketing Services in the UK. So we're really pleased to bring you this webinar today, and we have some great speakers lined up who will discuss best practice for creating virtual events, how to get them right, and provide you really useful resources and frameworks for planning. They'll also be sharing top tips on how to respond with adaptability to evolving challenges and opportunities that I know that we're all facing in this COVID-19 era. So just before we start, a couple of housekeeping bits. We're going to be live tweeting and using the hashtag marcomms toolkit, which you can see on this slide. So do keep an eye out on the Hotwire Twitter handle, which is @HotwireGlobal. And we do encourage you to take part in the conversation throughout. So we're using Zoom today as a platform to broadcast this webinar. So you don't really need to worry about muting your line or hearing any background noise from your other participants. But do have a look around the Zoom suite and you'll see a couple of different features. Notably, we really want to call out that Q&A feature because we'll be using that to take questions throughout the webinar. So please do pop any questions within that Q&A chat box, and then we'll address those as we come to the Q&A at the end. So without much further ado, I would really like to introduce you then to our speakers. And we have Koray Camgoz from Head of Communications and Marketing at the PRCA, and Michelle Goodall, who is Head of Marketing at Guild. Before we dive into their great presentations, and I know that you're all here to hear them speak, I just want to touch on a couple of different things that we ourselves at Hotwire have heard from our clients during this COVID-19 era. So this is a downloadable from our HotComms toolkit on the Hotwire Global website. And this is really the key takeaways from what we're hearing from our clients are their business focus, and where the comms emphasis should be at this time. And you can see that digital really plays a key pivotal role within this. We know there's a lot of businesses are looking at customer retention and really protecting the revenue streams that they have at this moment. And at the moment, we're still in that short-term planning phase. So looking at why we might be spring cleaning, whether we are refreshing our brand and messaging, whether we're looking at the website or our SEO for searchability, internal comms and how to communicate really clearly with a remote workforce, and turning our strategies digital first. So looking at the content that we already have, perhaps the thought leadership that we already have created, and how that extends across digital channels, both owned and shared, the website and our social media channels, but also making sure that we have the right tone in this COVID-19 era, that we're making sure that our messages are both helpful and also connect people within the industry. So coming on to some top tips and considerations, really looking at when we're creating digital content, what is it that we're doing and why are we doing it? So bringing it back to that framework, what is the business priority at the moment? Is it to protect revenue streams? Is it to create net new leads? And how does our digital content really feed into those key business priorities? Think about how our content can be helpful to our audience at this time. So we found that access to influencers or insight into the market conversations that are happening on social right now and top tips can really help make our content resonate with our audiences. We've really looked at our digital formats and how they're working across different channels. So if that's a video, then is that video optimized for Twitter or is it optimized for LinkedIn? On LinkedIn, that video can be a minute, whereas on Twitter, that might be 30 seconds. Also knowing that Google changed its algorithm about 3 months ago to really prioritize audio and visual content. So thinking about how that content can also help us provide searchability in these times. And one thing that we've heard a lot from our clients is really about looking at the skills within their in-house organizations and beyond the marketing teams. So do you have someone who is an avid podcaster in their spare time, and can they help you build those skills internally? Also asking your agency, of course, for what skills they have as well. we've thought a lot about localization, and we know that it can be tricky in these digital times to do everything quickly, but it's really important that we still consider localization as a key priority for our audiences. We can get a little bit lazy and use that US or European content and try and get it out there in a digital format for all our audiences, but really honing in on localization will make your content go further. Again, we want your content to work hard across the awareness, consideration, and conversion phases of that lead generation pipeline, if you're looking at that. And we've heard from the LinkedIn Masterclass the other day that 80% of decision makers really still do look at thought leadership content throughout that whole funnel, and especially in that consideration and conversion phases. So if you do have a PR agency or you are working in PR, know that your thought leadership content is absolutely incredibly important throughout the whole of that funnel, especially when we're looking at lead generation. So that's something that was a great thing to hear coming from a PR background and a marketing background myself. So that's it from me, and now we are going to pass you on to Koray Camgoz. So Koray, if you could take it from here.
Hi everyone, can you hear me okay, Natasha?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great. Hi everyone, as Natasha said, I'm Koray Camgoz. I'm the Head of Communications and Marketing at PRCA. So firstly, just want to say a big thank you for tuning in, and massive thank you to Hotwire for this opportunity for putting all of this together. As Natasha said, I'm going to talk briefly about our virtual international summit, and then I'll move on to share a few of the tips that I've picked up from working on virtual events over the past few weeks. Hopefully there'll be some practical tips in there that you can pick up and apply at your own organisation. If you aren't familiar with the PRCA, we're the world's largest professional PR body. We represent 45,000 professionals in 66 countries around the world. We have offices in London, Dubai, Singapore, and Buenos Aires. And I suppose fundamentally our mission is to create a more professional and prosperous PR industry. But to be honest, like most organisations, our world has been turned upside down in the past few weeks, and since the crisis hit, almost all of our work has been geared towards delivering support, resources, and representation to support businesses and people through the COVID-19 crisis. That includes anything from offering free consultations for PR professionals via our COVID-19 task force, to lobbying government directly to ensure that PR professionals get the financial packages that they deserve. So it's fair to say that this crisis has impacted our organisation more than it has most, whether it's training, networking, conferences or awards. A big chunk of our value proposition is reliant on face-to-face activity. As an example, last year we held over 250 events across the world, so we've really needed to make swift changes to lots of different parts of our business. So our international summit was set to be our flagship event for Q1. We had an excellent venue booked. We had the Chancery Lane, the Law Society on Chancery Lane book, and bookings were going really well. We had more than 100 people lined up to attend, but it soon became very clear that we wouldn't be able to hold the event first in a face-to-face format. So we worked with a virtual event specialist called Intrado to develop an entirely new program, and we wrote to all of our attendees to let them know that we wanted to switch to a virtual event. And to be honest with you, we had to be really careful with how we treated our delegates, and they'd all paid good money to attend the summit. So we had to work hard to convince them of the merits of a virtual summit. We were also very flexible, so we had to offer them incentives. So that includes anything from free tickets to discounts on training. So it's really important that we showed as much flexibility as possible. And the good news was that we managed to retain all of our delegates, which was a big boost for our events team. So on the 26th of March, we went public with our plans. And I believe we were the first major PR event to do this, to announce a virtual conference since the crisis, which on one hand was great because it showed we were ready to move quickly and continue delivering value. But on the other hand, because not many people were familiar with the concept, it did teach us a few lessons about
how hard you need to work to get people to buy into attending a virtual event. And that's probably the first tip I'd mention, really. It's really worth bearing in mind that if your audiences aren't accustomed to attending virtual events, you're asking them to buy into an entirely new way of learning. So it's really important you work hard to show people what the event will be like. So do use screenshots from the platforms, get speakers to blog or record videos previewing their content, anything that you feel will break through that barrier of hesitancy that your audiences might be experiencing. So our summit, as I mentioned, is due to take place next month on the 20th and 21st of May, but we've already held a few successful virtual events. So what I'll do is I'll just share a few tips that I've picked up along the way. And these apply to all platforms, really. We've used everything from Zoom, GoToWebinar, all the way through to dedicated event software. And the first thing to stress is that it's not simply a case of delivering content you'd ordinarily provide in a physical event. So when you think about your agenda, it's really important to start from scratch and put yourself in the shoes of those who'll be logging in. So that means making it digestible, breaking up the content. So for example, the average speaker slot for our international summit is 15 minutes. And we've split the event over 2 days. You've probably seen that some larger organizations and conferences have split their events across a whole week. And that's simply because no one wants to be glued for a laptop for the duration of a traditional conference. So do bear that in mind. The biggest thing that I've learned over the past few weeks with regards to virtual events is to audience interaction. And I'm really pleased you spoke about the chat function, Natasha, at the beginning, because it's so important that we move away from a broadcast model where you're talking and they're listening. And we encourage as much audience participation as possible. It might sound really straightforward, but the chat function is absolutely essential for that. If possible, I recommend having an extra member of staff on hand to monitor the chat feed and use the questions and contributions to help guide the discussion. Because ultimately, the audience feel their contributions are influencing the direction of the chat, and the result is a more enjoyable, effective, and engaging chat for everyone. So do use polls or Q&As to boost engagement. And the one point I'd make is that this is even more important for virtual events than it is for physical events, because obviously in physical events you have a captive audience who are listening and they're less likely to get up and leave while someone's talking, whereas it's a lot easier for people to get distracted and switch off from a virtual event. So 2 points here. The first is don't be afraid to pitch for speakers who you think might not ordinarily be interested in your event. And you'll be surprised because very senior people at the moment have a lot more time in their diaries than normal. So do be bold and ambitious with who you approach to speak. Secondly, bear in mind that your location is no longer restricted to a physical space, and therefore neither should your marketing. We're incredibly fortunate at the PRCA to have a really strong global presence, which has been enormously helpful, but I'd really encourage anyone running an event to approach international organizations and strike partnerships with companies from abroad, because virtual events open up access to everyone, and a lot of the time these international partnerships are a win-win. Finally, final point from me will be on sponsorship. Understandably, some sponsors can get really cold feet with virtual events, so it's vitally important to work on removing that anxiety. Try and be a bit creative with how you boost sponsorship visibility. As always, the best thing to do is to guide your sponsors and work with them to develop content that will be genuinely useful for your audience, and then weave it into your communication. So give them, for example, you could give them more visibility in your newsletter. You can include a post from them in the adjoining instructions, which you send out to attendees. Or you might even want to ask them to let them have the first question in the Q&A, which follows the discussion. So if you think creatively and you work innovatively, you can come up with a compelling sponsorship package, and it's really important to make sure those sponsorship deals are delivering for your partners. So that's it from me. Here are my details. If anyone would like to get in touch, feel free to drop me a line on using any of these channels, and I'll be happy to have a chat with anyone. And I look forward to answering some questions after Michelle. So Michelle, it's over to you.
Fabulous. Thank you, Koray. And actually, you've ensured that a couple of my points that I'm making have, hopefully will land with everybody as well. So I'm sad that you're not quite the BBC dad and your kids haven't run in or your cats or whatever. But it was really nice to see them at the end. So can I just check with you guys at Hotwire whether you can all see my screen and if you can hear me okay?
We can, Michelle. Can you hear us?
Fabulous. Yeah, okay. So let's get going then. My name is Michelle Goodall and I'm the head of marketing for Guild. I've been an online communications and digital specialist since what it feels like the year .com. And I create virtual events such as webinars, e-learning and conferences on top of my marketing and communications responsibilities. My background is that I set up the UK's first digital PR agency in the 90s. And I was head of digital at Lexus PR when we were a really hot agency in the noughties, doing lots of digital events and digital firsts, such as Dove's campaign for Real Beauty, their online communities, and also launching brands into virtual spaces like Second Life, that virtual world that everyone got really excited about in the days. Now I'm here to try and help your virtual events pop in the short time that we've got. And for those of you who do want to contact me, then obviously you can connect up with me on LinkedIn, on Twitter, or on Guild if you're on it already. So I'm sorry to show these slides, but these were the days, weren't they? And as Koray says, ultimately, events are the lifeblood of many organisations, many brands, many of us out there. And it feels like a really long while ago that we were attending and speaking and networking at big events like the Festival of Marketing and also our smaller specialist events in our industries and in our different sectors. Now, cancellations of these events started at the end of February and then really gathered pace quickly. Now, Guild founder Ashley Friedlin is also the founder of eConsultancy, who actually run the Festival of Marketing and also hundreds of other events such as roundtables, training and other events which are a big part of their revenue stream. Now, Ashley saw firsthand the financial impact on businesses and also events, businesses and media as well, that there was a lot of uncertainty around revenue loss, venue cancellation and also policies on things like insurance. So media and event specialists were absolutely amongst the first to have to quickly develop and adapt their physical events to digital experiences. Now he realised that he could actually help these organisations navigate this uncertainty through COVID-19, and we decided to create a free peer support group on Guild. Now, for those of you who aren't on Guild already, it's a private messaging platform for professionals. It's as easy to use as WhatsApp, but it's GDPR and CCPA compliant, so data and privacy compliant. And it can act as a quick and easy way to help you create online communities. So this is what we did. On March the 3rd, in 2 hours, we set up the CREO Group, the Coronavirus Response for Event Organisers Group. We sent out a blog post and also a tweet offering to help. And within 24 hours, over 100 senior events professionals had joined the group. And the membership quickly doubled. And today there are over 400 people globally who are events professionals helping each other out, creating open source resources, discussing best practice, things like virtual event technology, crisis management, and much more beside. Now, the 400 CREO members have been really generous with their support to each other. And actually, as hosts and events organisers ourselves, we're also able to offer a bit of support and advice, but we've learned so much from them. So there's a lot of collective wisdom in this group about making virtual events a success. So I've tapped into that. And this is what we've learned. The first thing is to really think hard about the medium and not just the technology. As Koray said, there's lots of technology out there that can help you with these virtual events, but actually go right back to the start. Do you really need to create a virtual event? Is it absolutely the right thing to do? Now, we recently launched a free report called Mastering Messaging in the Workplace, and we looked at the growth of messaging as a medium and where it sits in the internal and the external communications mix. There's actually a link at the bottom of the pyramid there, bit.ly/Guild pyramid, so you can download that if you want to. Now, communications strategists are finding that this colourful hierarchy of messaging model is really, really useful because it asks you to think hard about the communications medium that you're using and the purpose of that medium, as well as what needs are being met. So virtual events, as Koray said, have supplemented a lot of the in-person parts of our communications mix, but they're not always necessarily the answer to our communications needs. So use this model and ask yourself, do I need to create an event as something that replaces face-to-face communication? Or can I achieve my objectives in other ways? Look at what the handoff is between email, events, social media. So for example, rather than running multiple Zoom webinars where you have to recruit for the event every single time, could you instead create a small branded community and add stimulus such as reports and video and be part of a discussion that plays out over days, weeks, or even months? As an example, the CIPR have a Greater London group that have regular meetups on Zoom, but they also use a guild group to chat and message each other on a daily basis and provide peer support at this difficult time. They're highlighting opportunities, they're giving each other moral support, and it's in part replaced the face-to-face networking that would have taken place at CIPR events, but also these Zoom events work really hard for them as well. Now, let's talk about virtual events specifically. Even though I could talk about communities for hours on end, I don't have the time. So if you do choose a virtual event, and if it is the right medium, then understand, as Koray said, you can't wholly replicate a physical event online. You actually need to reverse engineer your event from a digital perspective. Think about what you can do in digital that's really hard to achieve in real life. For example, you can ask attendees to work collectively on a collaborative document in Google Docs in real time. You can use the rooms in Zoom to quickly maneuver people to separate breakout areas for discussion or to work collaboratively together. Now that would be a logistical nightmare in a physical event, but it's quite simple in Zoom, where people can break out, collaborate, and then present back to the wider group. The next tip is to keep it short. Bear in mind that at the moment, your event attendees will also be looking after children, pets, and also other dependents as well. And actually, this is funny, a former colleague of mine mentioned that her virtual event was derailed last week by an attendee applauding their child who was used their potty successfully. Now, my kids, fortunately, are old enough to stay out of the way today, but my cat might just make an appearance. But even if your attendees aren't looking after other people, the sheer mental load of what's going on at the moment really makes it quite hard for people to concentrate for long spells. Now, even pre-lockdown, 20 minutes on Zoom or Crowdcast would be really tiring for all of us. In fact, all of our online events, whether that's training or whether that's webinars, we tend to try and chunk them into under 20 minutes to allow people to reset their attention. Now, what I would say is use the TED Talk format. So ideally under 18 minutes, that sort of format per speaker, that works really, really hard. So if we've got only 20 minutes of this lean in kind of attention in virtual events, what about longer events? Well, as I said before, you can have live collaborative documents, or you could pre-record most of your content, get presenters to record themselves at home and then post it. You can also make sure that you are thinking about, how you get people to engage in these kind of low friction ways. So you do need to think about breaking things up. And what I would say is a really good way to do this is not to rely on the Q&A in the chat function, but actually be aware that people are quite wary of using the chat function or the microphones if they don't know other attendees well. So do think about what we call low friction engagements that require lots of less thinking and less effort from attendees. Now, on a 1-hour webinar on eConsultancy's Lowdown last week, Ashley broke off every 10 minutes to ask polls via polls on Slido whether the attendees agreed with elements of his presentation and whether his findings in his presentation actually matched their personal experiences. And that worked really, really well. And also gave eConsultancy some really nice statistically relevant data for their future blog posts as well. So that's something to think about. Don't make me think. Use low friction engagement if you possibly can. Now, tip number 4 is to make your event a must attend. As Koray said, really aim high for your expert speakers, because be really honest with yourself. How many virtual events are you seeing right now, and how many are you signing up for? All you have to do is look for the spike in Google searches for Zoom in March 2020 to see how many events are going on right now on that particular platform. And there's only so much time in the day to attend these virtual events. And so therefore, what we have to think is that we're competing against not just events professionals, but also other brands, other agencies for the same time slots, the same budgets if you're charging for your events, and also attention as well. So make sure that your event is a must attend. And the simple way to do this is to give people a compelling reason to shunt something out of their diary. Now, there are loads of ways to do this. For example, you can think about serialization with really good expert speakers with real pull factors. So again, eConsultancy on the Lowdown series use Mark Ritson, Tom Goodwin from Publicis, and other really brilliant speakers to ensure that attention is grabbed for at least half an hour on a weekly basis. But if it's hard to get these kind of speakers, you can think about other things. For example, could you launch a unique piece of research or data, or develop a useful model for, or a framework for debate, like our hierarchy of messaging? Another really good route is e-learning. So if you can create something, that, for example, just 5 minutes of videos or topics, and 5 of each around hot topics or pain points that people are grappling with right now, then the really sort of simple proposition and the promise of knowledge can be a really good draw to get people to free up their time to attend these events. The next thing is about the right technology. Now, there are lots of platforms and tools that you can use. And you all know about Zoom, you're on it right now, but there are other options as well. Now, I'm not here to sell you Guild, but there are lots of people using it as an event community platform where features can be kind of created around speakers. They can answer questions. There's networking opportunities for event attendees as well. You can link out to stuff as it's happening. You can post audio files, podcasts, videos, and also link out to content and reports as well. Again, you can create live collaborative documents that you can link out to using Google Docs or Dropbox, and record your content ahead of time. There's lots of ways that you can do this through things like Wistia or Ecamm Live on the Mac as well. It really doesn't matter if your video is a bit raw, because it makes it feel much more intimate as well. Now, there are lots of other types of technology, and in the CREO group, people are talking about things like Hey Summit, Hopin, iEvent. There are a number of these as well. They cost quite a bit of money, but obviously if you are going to go down the multiple speaker, multiple track, multiple day route, then you'll need to think about these high-end technologies as well. Now, you can see today when it comes to any live event, you're relying on home broadband. So this can be quite challenging for us hosts and also speakers as well. So make sure that you've pre-tested everything, make sure that your speakers are close to their routers, and also test everything. Disconnect absolutely everything. The kids, the washing machine, laptops, phones. The most common issue and problem with these webinars and events is the Wi-Fi. So where possible, make sure that your kids aren't streaming or screaming at the same time. And finally, we could do a whole presentation on this slide alone. Think before and beyond the time span of the planned event itself. Think about it as a month's experience, which still meets the brief, but also the promise of the event as well. At the very least, you should be promoting it 2 weeks out with the usual social, CRM, email, PR outreach, optimised blog posts, podcast interviews, and also paid media support. Now, if you want to see examples of this in action right now, we'll look at Hotwire's approach with these series of events as well, but also Like Mind's Lockdown Festival, which is working really well at the moment. Make an effort to get attendees to introduce themselves in advance and send questions and feature your speakers. Get them to do mini videos, as Koray said, introducing their topics. Encourage questions. You can even incentivize this by running competitions to win tickets. If you have time after the event, then make sure that the event is recorded, that you edit it into chunkable sort of bite-sized pieces as well. And again, look at eConsultancy's Lowdown for an example of best practice around this. What they do is they take their webinars, they quickly upload them, and they promote them alongside upcoming content and other events, as well as the webinar content actually feeding into blog posts and reports for the future. So that's it from me, a real whistle stop, and we can, as I say, talk about this for hours on end, not just a few minutes. But what I would say is, if you are an events organizer, I would really encourage you to join the CREO community. Experience, the peer support in there, because there are lots of people asking exactly the same questions that you have there as well. There's lots of useful content on our blog around community and also events as well. And I'm really happy to give this presentation, if required, by any of the attendees as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Michelle. So we're going to go now into our Q&A session. I'm going to share my screen. So we do have the first two questions for you, Michelle. And our first question is from David, and he's been involved in a couple of virtual events in the last few weeks that were originally physical. He says that reach and attendance has been bigger than but they've struggled to engage audiences. So do you have any tips on how to move attendees across that customer journey virtually?
Yeah, I think as Koray said, and as I said as well, ultimately your digital events are nothing like your physical events. So, re-engineering them is really, really important. A bit like sort of in the olden days when people took, publications to digital and then, publications to real world events. We've just got to think about these really differently. So a lot of it does come down to the blend of technology and your tech stack that you're using. But certainly the events that we're seeing that seem to have a lot of engagement and also are getting people to come back and actually, re-register for future events are those whereby you're really thinking about different sort of levels of engagement. As I said, and I probably didn't make the point very clearly, was low friction engagement is something that not just means that people are paying attention, but also that they feel that there's value from them. So, the polls, the Slido, on something like Zoom, if you're using Zoom, you can have up to 25 different polls per webinar as well. So that's a really good way to do it, to actually stop, pause and ask people to come back, as to whether or not this matches their experience. What have you found? Not open questions, but closed questions are really good ways of doing this. I would also suggest that Koray pops in at this point as well, because, he has to battle with this through lots of different formats of events.
I would reiterate everything that you've said, Michelle. I think that the main thing from our point of view is making sure that firstly there's a real need for the event, as you said, but at that point just having a really honest conversation in your team about what your audience are looking for and what as an organization you're trying to achieve. So I mentioned earlier on about breaking up the content and making sure it's digestible, but ultimately it's about starting from scratch and thinking about, if you were logging in and wanting to learn from the event, how best can you go about delivering that for your audience? And we came up with a packed agenda, so we've got about 20 to 25 speakers now in total, but it's taken a lot of planning to kind of make sure that all of that is not too crammed and that it's spaced out appropriately. But I think with the right planning, it's achievable and hopefully will deliver some real value for members.
And I would add another thing, I was sort of saying on that last slide that you have to look at the event, in terms of pre, during, and also post as well. One of the things about virtual events is that you can ask people to do things ahead of time. You can set challenges. You can actually engage some of the speakers with the attendees, and actually, if you've got some sponsors as well, you can engage the sponsors with some of the attendees as well. So lots of the technology that is available out there will allow you to be able to do this. Now, obviously, if you're the PRCA or if you are running, kind of events where they're monetized in part by sponsors, you'll want to kind of control that engagement as much as possible as well. But there is the technology that is out there that is available and allows you to do this.
Yeah, I think that leads us nicely on to our second question then, which is there a rule of thumb for how much you can charge for a virtual event? Is that half the price or a third of the price? Koray, maybe you want to speak from a kind of PRCA membership perspective there.
Yeah, this is a really interesting point, and it was one of the things I wanted to include in the original presentation, but I was conscious of not overloading the slides. It's really, really difficult, if I'm being honest, to price this this format of event in a way. I think you have to be honest with both yourselves and your stakeholders and your delegates, that the amount of money that goes into holding a physical event is nowhere near the same for holding a virtual one, and that should be reflected in the price. So, for example, our virtual international summit was originally priced for around £275 plus VAT, and we've reduced that to members for £75 plus VAT. And we will be offering concessions and discounted tickets for independent practitioners or anyone affected by the current crisis. So I think it's really important to have a flexible approach to pricing, but be realistic and be honest with your stakeholders as well. And it's very clear that you will have to charge less than you would for a physical event. And I think as long as you're open and upfront with the people who matter to your organisation, I think they will see the value in that. And indeed, the ticket sales suggest that we've got that balance about right so far.
What I would say is that, you know, these are unprecedented times, and you know, in the CREO community, people are basically saying that if your events are anything up to September at the moment and they were planned physical events, then the likelihood is that they're not going to, you know, run in the physical world. So therefore you do have to think about either dropping or converting to digital. Now, there are lots of different schools of thought around, you know, again, concessions, but also other people who are looking at not necessarily dropping the price, but bringing in value-added activity. As you said, you know, Koray, the quality of the speakers, you know, because it is virtual, you don't need to fly people over from the States or, you know, elsewhere around the world. It can be conducted in this way. So there are kind of cost savings to be made as a events organizer, but also you can layer in other experiences. And I think that sort of layering of e-learning, you know, the ability to be able to run training tracks alongside what would be, you know, kind of a traditional event, I think is a model that a lot of the people within CREO are looking at, which I think is quite exciting. And what I would say is that hopefully, you know, this will pass, but I don't think what will pass is that we will, you know, take digital events very, very seriously, and we'll plan them in a very different way. So in terms of dropping prices and actually, you know, devaluing almost the digital experience right now, I think that's for now, but I think we need to look towards the future and actually think about how we start to layer in value to our events. I think if you're just kind of, you know, talking to camera or, you know, delivering old-fashioned webinar type events, then they only have a certain amount of value. Think, you know, much more broadly.
Great. And just one further question, Michelle, you talked about this in your presentation, but how important is e-learning? So that 5 to 10 minute conversation between experts to really engage your audience and to make sure that you can get some sponsorship of that digital event.
Yeah, I'd say it's critical. Because, you know, what you have with the digital events is that there are lots of ways to be able to network, and through that networking you tend to learn a lot anyhow. But I think, you know, again, as I said in that previous answer, the ability to be able to create more formal learning experiences. And I think one of the great things about, you know, even the sort of the relatively basic tools like Zoom or Crowdcast, etc., is the ability to be able to, you know, break people out into, you know, small collaborative groups, you know, to actually host things like whiteboarding sessions, to put up documents so they can actually create something within physical spaces as well. I'm really excited about, you know, this sort of intersection between, you know, kind of events and virtual learning. I think it's got people to think really differently about training and skills development.
And we did have one question on virtual event platforms, and I think it'd be great to hear both of your answers on this, but which virtual event platform do you recommend? You go first, Koray.
Okay. We're using a platform called Intrado, which is a company based out in Chicago. But to be honest with you, they are, I mean, there are tons, and we have lots of different organizations who we work with, which also provide those services. The one thing I'd make on it is that, you know, there are various platforms that deliver different features and different aspects of the interactive experience. But the one thing I'd really stress is the fact that this whole situation with the current crisis has really kind of democratized nature of events. So, In the past, you might have an event, say, organised by a prestigious organisation, maybe like the IOD, for example, where you'd have a very prestigious venue. And then on the other hand, you'd have lower budget events with smaller venues. But the great thing about what we have now is a kind of equal platform for everyone. And to be honest, the platform that you use will not make a huge difference compared to the thought and strategy that you put into place before doing so. So I'd really emphasize what Michelle has said about planning, going through whether you really need the event, and looking at every aspect of how you can deliver maximum value for your attendees.
Great.
Yeah, and you know, in that technology slide, you could see, you know, I've just listed a few in the CREO Group. You know, people are talking about hundreds of different types of technology, but it comes down, number one, to your budget. One that does seem to be sort of rising above the others in terms of the virtual events that are planned over multiple days with multiple streams and multiple tracks. There are a couple, I would say, Hopin, Hopin, and also Zapnito tend to be the two that we hear most about from sort of the global events organisers. But you know what, as I said before, you can go down the relatively simple tech stack route. So, you know, I'm from Guild, so obviously I'm going to be biased about this, but actually having a community that runs alongside your events, I think is really, really important, particularly if you're going to be doing them on a regular basis as well. So, you know, go back to that slide, go and have a look at, you know, the kind of technologies that we were recommending. But, you know, I think start off with simple, you know, make sure that you don't go sort of all singing, all dancing first, test the efficacy of the idea. But I think the experience, the speakers, and how you sort of, you know, create the event is much more important than the technology itself.
Thanks so much. We've got 2 minutes left, so I've got one last question, and hopefully it should be a quick one, which is, for free virtual events, what is the standard drop-off rate? Michelle, would you like to answer that? Do you know?
Yeah,
one yet coming?
I think, I mean, I would have to go in and sort of, you know, ask the question and then do the maths, but it seems that certainly any of the virtual events that we're running, it seems to be less or fewer than those actually going to physical events. So I think it's, you know, it tends to be around about sort of 25 to 30%. So, you know, ultimately people are more inclined to not drop out if they're paying for things. And this is where sort of the value proposition comes in. So, you know, do think about that. If you're having high drop-offs from your events, then, you know, have you got your proposition? Have you actually got the ask right? Should you be thinking about a charging model? And at that point, then you are competing against, you know, many other brands and organizations as well. But I would say if you're, you know, getting more than 25 to 30%, then you do need to think about, well, number one, your timings, number two, you know, who your speakers are, what the proposition is, and you know, what value you're bringing.
Great. Well, thank you so much. So that brings us to the end of our Q&A session, and I'd like to say a massive thanks to Koray and Michelle for sharing those top tips. They've been really useful. There were some questions that we didn't get to, but don't worry, we will be following up with you to help you to answer some of those questions and be putting you in touch with guest speakers as relevant. So again, we wanted to just let you know that we do have the Hot Comms Toolkit on the Hotwire Global website, so please do take a look at that. We'll also be following up with you with that link. And to mention that this is the first in a series of webinars coming from Hotwire, so do stay tuned with our next one, which is going to be hosted by Chris Paxton, who is our Chief Strategy Officer, and he'll be talking about planning for preparedness and post-COVID-19, and that's going to take place on the 28th of April at 3 p.m. So we'll be sharing that invite to all of you. So a big thank you to everyone for taking part, and we had some great questions there at the end. We'll be following up with each of you with more information about what's coming down the line, and sharing that link to our Hot Comms Toolkit. Thank you very much.